Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest for part 2, round 2. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Yeah, I'm Ron Voller. I'm an author based in New York City, and I'm currently on vacation in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
Great. And I just in under 5 minutes, because we got a lot to talk about. In under 5 minutes, can you tell the people about your past leading up into what you do now, however you want to curve it?
Sure. Yeah, I went to college for I grew up in Chicago, Illinois, in a kind of a curious environment, lots going on, song and dance, lots of music and literature. And I sort of followed that through my college career. I got a degree in music and literature from the University of Denver, and I stayed there and had a music career for about 10 years or so. And after a while, I decided I still wanted to try the writing side of life. It's my second love. And I moved to New York City. And I've been writing, basically been writing since I could write. But I fell into a couple of different writing genres, but ended up researching the life of a fairly unknown astronomer who ended up being pivotal to the research behind the discovery of the Big Bang, and ended up writing a couple of books about him.
So did he ever work with Albert Einstein?
Yeah, he and Einstein ended up corresponding quite a bit after the discovery. This guy's name was Milton Humason, and everybody knows his partner's name, Edwin Hubble, Hubble Space Telescope, et cetera, et cetera. And Hubble was a great researcher in his own right and kind of led the research on the Big Bang. But Milton Humason was this different kind of cat. He was 8th grade educated. He never went to high school, let alone college or PhD. He was a moonshiner and a poker player, just a real backwoods kind of a guy. Great storyteller, life of every party kind of guy. And but he discovered at a very late age, for people in the scientific field anyway, this skill he had, this adaptation for photographing the stars. And so he became the preeminent observer at the preeminent observatory in the world. And he ended up, a guy named Carl Sagan. Some of your viewers might be familiar with Carl Sagan. He did a series called Cosmos back in the 70s, very well-regarded astronomer. He referred to Milton Humason as the virtuoso of the 100-inch telescope, which was the largest and most state-of-the-art telescope of the day. And he ended up, he was 30 years old when he became an astronomer. And 10 years later, he was standing with Einstein and Edwin Hubble, having his photograph taken, having proved to Einstein that the universe was expanding. And so he's just this real oddball character, and probably my favorite historical figure, one of my favorites of all time, and certainly of the last 100 years.
Do you feel like, or is there factual evidence that the universe is still expanding?
Yeah, it's actually, the current evidence is that it's expanding and will continue to expand. There's this force out there. We haven't seen it. We kind of know it's there. Based on what's happening, we can see that something is pulling the universe farther and farther apart, this dark energy you've probably heard about. I don't talk too much about that in my book. I've really been researching. We'll probably get to that in my next book, actually. But in this book, I go through some background information about the developments in telescope technology and chemistry and various things that led to sort of set the table for the guys, guys like Hubble and Humason to do the work they needed to do in the 20th century. And we needed Einstein also to develop his equations, which led people to this crazy idea that, wait a minute, maybe the universe actually did begin. We don't know for sure, but maybe it did begin from this one point in time and space. And
I had a quick question. Just pause there. So how Hollywood ended up having a camera. I mean, maybe they thought of the Big Bang because, okay, the camcorder had a flash, and then all of a sudden a negative come to at first it was just black and white, and then it was just color, and then black and white negative. But the Big Bang didn't happen like that, but it was a big bang of light, and it flashed everywhere and created this whole universe. What is your interpretation on that? A camera versus a Big Bang. I know that's
it's interesting. It's an interesting point. Yes, the flash was remarkable. We don't really have a way of quantifying the extent of that flash, the initial flash. And actually, in the first milliseconds after the flash, the universe was all light. There was no darkness anywhere. And it was only through these collisions of these little particles of matter, antimatter and matter, colliding and spontaneously combusting, and then regrouping and creating these particle pairs and then self-annihilating over time, that some of them survived. And that's how the universe was ultimately created. You ended up with these, what was called free hydrogen particles. And that still makes up most of the material universe anyway. And they, so that was kind of how it grew. But we wouldn't know any of this without the advent of photography, because we can't see far enough into the past without being able to photograph and take long exposures of deep space so that we can reach out farther and farther into space. And there was actually an astronomer's son, a guy named John Herschel, who started photography, and he found this material that allowed light and image to gather on a plate, and the short name for it is hypo. And he basically created photography. And actually the first photo image he took was of his father, the shell of his father's big telescope. His father's name was William Herschel. And this is in my book, and William Herschel and John Herschel, both of them are in my book. But William Herschel created some of the early and most state-of-the-art telescopes of his generation in the 18th and early 19th century. And he created one that was 40 feet long, a big thing, and this big wooden superstructure that rotated and the whole thing. It was a refractor, so it had the lens in the front, whereas most telescopes today are reflectors. They have a big mirror at the bottom of them that does most of the light gathering. But John Herschel, when he developed photography, took an image. They were tearing down his father had passed away at the time. And they were tearing down that big telescope to make room for other things on the grounds. And before they did, he took an image of it. And it's kind of a famous early silver type image from that era, from the 19th century.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's the difference between taking an image from the bottom or having light come in from the bottom versus the top? You absorb more, you get more of what's your input? You're
right on target, Kimberly. Excellent. So the early telescopes were refractors. Galileo's telescope was a refractor. and that had the lens in the front, like I said, and it basically narrowed the focus down to an eyepiece, and then you look through that eyepiece the way you do binoculars. Binoculars are basically refracting telescopes. What a reflecting telescope does several things. It can gather more light. You do that by aperture, right? The size of like the largest refractor ever made was 40 inches in diameter. But they can make a reflector much, much bigger. The 100-inch is a perfect example. There's also a 200-inch telescope. All of the space telescopes, the optical scopes, the Hubble is an 8-meter. So they're big. These are big, big optical telescopes. And they're making giant telescopes, 30-meter telescopes in Chile and up on Mauna Kea in Hawaii. So these telescopes can get really, really large. And what they do is they capture more light. And the more light you can capture, the deeper you can look into space, and the more and the clearer you get images of various things. So these big ground-based telescopes that the Carnegie Institution with Caltech is building now, these telescopes can actually look farther into space than even the Hubble telescope or the Webb telescope. So they're going to be looking at, exoplanets. You've probably heard of those exoplanets, and looking very deep into space for these deep space black holes, and really uncovering some of the stuff that we're trying to understand better as a species.
Well said. And so many questions I want to ask. For instance, you have different telescopes, but there's I forgot what they call it, like some things that go out of space that can is that the Webb telescope?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're talking about? Tell us about that, because that recently got put out of space like 2 years ago or a year ago. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was a monumental achievement.
Yes.
In part because the telescope had to sort of unfold in space, and they sent it very far away. It's at a place called a Lagrange point, very far, the other side of the moon, in fact. Whereas the Hubble Space Telescope orbits the Earth, between the Earth and the moon. This is way out in space. Oh. So you can't just go out there and park the way we did. We had gone out and actually fixed the Hubble Space Telescope on occasion when we needed to make some changes to it. But the main difference is, so the spectrum, the whole spectrum, is actually much bigger than the visual spectrum, the stuff we see. And the Hubble Space Telescope mainly sees within that optical range. We call it an optical telescope for that reason. It has mirrors, it captures light. The Webb telescope captures light too, but it captures it in a wavelength that isn't visual. We don't see it. It's in the infrared range. And what it can do is so these wavelengths get longer and longer over time. And the Webb, so we can't see them anymore, but the Webb can detect them. So what it's doing is the Webb can go in and look at stuff that Hubble has already seen and shown us, and we look at the images and go, wow. The Webb can go in and get more detail, because it gets the stuff that would be fuzzy, would be basically invisible to Hubble. And it can really pull more clarity out of those same images and those same space objects that we've been looking at for so many years and really marveling at. And also it can go deeper into space, largely because it can capture these wavelengths that otherwise wouldn't be picked up by the Hubble telescope. It's just not powerful enough. So, the Webb telescope is a great new telescope. I should mention that these big ground telescopes will have infrared technology. And there are other telescopes that capture different parts of the spectrum, and for different reasons. And so we're really starting to get a good picture of what's out there. And hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll start to unpack some of the deeper concepts, black energy and black matter, etc. Things that are the stuff that makes up most of the material universe is this black matter and this dark energy that dark matter. Sorry, it's really transparent, but anyway, and this dark energy that's kind of pulling things apart.
Do you think that it's probably balanced to create more life? Because as things get pulled apart, things develop like new planets and new stars, right?
Well, yeah, I think we'll probably see some of that. There's a lot of some of the galaxies are really close together, so we can see merging galaxies today. You can see some of these images online if you want. You'll see two spiral, what looks like two spiral galaxies, and they're so close together that they actually look like they're merging. They are merging, and actually, the Milky Way had a collision like this. Many eons ago, and that helped. That created these. When they merge like this, they create what we call starburst events, where you create a lot of matter crashing into other big material objects, and you get these spin-offs of material, and that material gathers together, and a lot of the gases together, and so you create a lot of stars all at once instead of just creating one once in a while. So there's a lot of these things that are being unpacked and discovered as we move along, and the more stuff we get, the more technology we get, and the more our technology advances, the more we can kind of start to resolve some of these outstanding, and there are many outstanding questions still to be answered.
And tell us, how does the like you said, the starburst, like for instance, what I mean by that is the Earth. We'll start with the middle of the actual the galaxy, because it's a galaxy, it's a universe or solar system. Let's start with our solar system, the pool,
Okay.
the invisible pool. And you got the rings, the invisible rings. So you're saying that our solar system has a galaxy, which both galaxies are coming in together, as your example being.
Well, our galaxy isn't currently in a merger. There are a couple of galaxies that are approaching us. Everything else is moving away from us very rapidly, but the very near ones, a couple of the very near ones, are actually approaching the Milky Way, and that will eventually end in a collision between them, but very far off. The sun will have burned up before they merge. But the answer to your previous question is that if, and this is what Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Cox and the astrophysics world believes currently, is that the universe is indeed expanding, and as it expands, eventually we won't be able to see. Everything will be so far apart that we won't actually be able to see anything outside of the Milky Way. So when future astronomers look out, way far, future astronomers look out at the universe, they'll just see that darkness, and the only thing they'll be able to study is the Milky Way. If that holds, we don't, there are a lot of unanswered questions, so we don't exactly know what's going on. There's the multiverse theory and all these other theories. We haven't seen any of that stuff. It seems logical. There's definitely mathematics, theoretical math behind the possibility or even probability. So, we'll wait. We just have to see. It'll be many generations maybe before we find some of the answers out to these questions. But no, the Milky Way is, for the moment anyway, isolated. The sun, our solar system, and its 8 planets, main planets, and all of the debris rotating around it, all the way out past the Oort cloud. Many AU, we call them AU. And AU is basically the distance between the Earth and the sun, 90-ish million miles. And this 50, 60 and more AU, 1,000 AU out, way out. All of that debris is rotating around the sun. The sun is but one of 2 or 3 or 400 billion stars just in the Milky Way. And the Milky Way is one of maybe 1 trillion or more galaxies, whole small universes, if you want, of stars and their assorted planets. So the universe is incredibly large. Yeah.
So it's safe to say that I know you know what an outlier is, that as the universe expands, there's going to be only a couple of habitable, and we're going to be sort of like ancient aliens ourselves. There's going to be a couple of habitable planets once we figure out this, who's what's habitable in what planets, whether 300 years behind us or 1,000 years ahead of us. Mm-hmm. We're going to be one of the very few outliers that incorporate how can I say this? We're going to be an outlier that incorporates creating more life to regrow and because this thing, I didn't even know. I mean, I know that planets die, but it just seems like everything is a cycle of life, you know. And so what is your input on being an outlier and possibly being an ancient alien and just all of that?
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yes.
The current consensus is that Mars once had oceans, life. Whether or not that life was intelligent, even remotely intelligent, is not known. We're going to find out very soon. The exoplanet business is exoplanet research is one of the hottest fields of research right now in astrophysics and astronomy. And I think with these big ground telescopes coming online in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to start to unpack some of the local planets. I've spoken with John Mulcahy at Carnegie about this. He's the director of the observatories there. And there are a dozen or more really good candidates for research. And with these telescopes, we should be able to see pretty clearly what's going on some of these. Now, if that turns out and you're looking at Mars and you're thinking, okay, well, somehow Mars got its outer security blanket blown off by some event or something happened, and so it dried up and the life ceased to exist on it. Was any of that life transported by whatever happened to the planet? Did it get hit by an asteroid so large that it destroyed the life on the planet? And from that explosion were bits of material transferred to the Earth? And did that material transfer benefit the Earth in terms of its habitability? We don't quite know the answer to some of these questions yet. These are things that are still being determined. Space is a volatile place. It's a violent place. Even the Earth, we know from disease and the various species that you bump into, it's not always the most habitable place either. I mean, the flowers are nice, but sometimes they bite. So I mean, there's a lot to unpack, but currently I'm hearing as many as maybe 20 billion habitable planets are possible in the galaxy. So even if you didn't have any other, first of all, getting from Earth to the nearest star is impossible in a human lifetime at this point. So, and the nearest star is only 8 years away at the speed of light. The other side of the galaxy is 70,000 years away at the 70,000 years away at the speed of light. So it's a big galaxy. So we need to learn how to get places in a hurry. We're probably going to start here in our own solar system and try to figure out if we can inhabit some of these other places. Whether we need to or not will depend on how well we take care of our own planet, our mother planet. So there are a lot of things that, we're going to find out. People ask me sometimes, what part of history would you like to go to? I want to go forward. I want to see where we end up. I'm very interested to see how we do in handling some of the pressures and problems we've created through the development of our civilization and as a people. And it fascinates me more than I'm a pretty good reader of history. So I feel like, no, I'd like to go and see where this all ends up. But there could be many, many candidates for life is the short answer. I'm sorry it took so long, but
it's fine. I learned so much that I forget what I'm saying. I want to say, I don't care. So the web scope. Okay, you said it's wavelengths, which means that these wavelengths have to be brought by like some type of broadcast. Let me explain for a second. Some type of broadcast where they have, like, for instance, let me use this as an example. A couple of weeks back, I heard that somebody got wavelengths sent to Venus. But Venus, to me, I don't believe is a habitable planet. So I'm like, why are they sending wavelengths unless there is some type of thing there, some type of wavelength that can receive, what they transmit over there. So I'm wondering if they have different which would be the Hubble scope or however you call it. But how can I say this? Like, go on different planets, put in like metallic type materials like poles or something that can pick up sort of like not satellite. Yeah, probably like a satellite. You know how they have the little satellites in sonar or whatever, however you call it, in different areas in the universe that picks up on this web scope. What do you think about that? Because I'm just wondering, how does it, go throughout the universe looking more, the images is more better than a black and white photo.
Yeah. So I think the best way to think about a telescope is that it's a receiver of electromagnetic or light energy. It's not a transponder. It's more of a receiver.
Oh, okay.
And the Webb telescope is collecting this infrared light, mainly in the infrared part of the spectrum, from these distant objects. So it points itself, like an antenna would point itself, at this little pinprick in space, and way out in the distance, maybe as much as 13 billion light years in the distance, it starts collecting information that's being sent, and the wavelengths are so long that but they're at the right length that this telescope can pick them up and translate them into information, digital information. So they can pick up the signature of a black hole or a very distant, very ancient, early proto-galaxy, for instance, like early galaxies, when that dust from the early universe, when the universe was still relatively small, and a lot of that early gas was coalescing into these massive stars and, early galaxies. And these stars were so massive and so bright and so big and burned so hot that they actually burned off all their fuel and collapsed on themselves into these massive supernovas and eventually formed these black holes. That's the current, and that's what the web is going out now and trying to find some of this information. And it actually is finding more surprises than almost than answers. So it's really fascinating. It's a fascinating time in astronomy. And for young people who might be interested in getting into it, I highly recommend studying and listening to people like Brian Cox and Michio Kaku and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And they're great. They're wonderful teachers. They're very patient. They have really cool, neat ideas, and you can really get into it. And if you get a degree in astronomy, you can work anywhere. They are usually out of the box thinkers, and so they work really good in a number of different environments.
2 questions in one. Are there white holes too, like black holes in a black hole? Have we came to realize, or do we know if there's any light at the end of the black hole?
We don't think there's light, but we do Hawking radiation. You remember Stephen Hawking? Yeah. So he was the guy. He came out with, originally when black holes were thought to exist back in the late 1930s, that whole theory came out. A black hole is basically a star that exploded in a supernova and then collapsed in on itself, and so it has this core. And that core is so dense that no light can escape it. It creates a field around it. And that field, called an event horizon, that rotates around it. The star is still rotating. And that field that's created around it is the actual black hole. And it is thought that as light objects pass into it, that light is extinguished. However, as Hawking said, there is some radiation, and we've actually started to see that radiation now coming from the black hole. So it does look like there's so much. You have to think about every reaction that takes place everywhere in the universe creates energy. It creates heat energy in various forms, right? And so nowhere in the universe is there more energy being exchanged than inside a black hole. This is a place where things are being whipped up at a very, very high rate. And so there's bound to be some energy. And Stephen Hawking kind of put that plan together mathematically. And it looks like that's probably going to hold up. But we're going to find there are unanswered problems with that radiation where gravity is concerned, where Einstein's equations are concerned. And so that's where this thing called the unified field, the unification of Einstein relativity, which is the material universe, and quantum mechanics, which is the stuff that binds the atoms together that become the universe, the elements together that become the universe, will eventually, hopefully, be resolved. And then we may find something else that needs to be discovered yet that is still objective, that needs to be the glue that pulls those two things together. Because right now, at some very fine point early in the universe, inside black holes and elsewhere, the expansion, they don't quite come together the way we need them to.
So, question, if you go into a black hole with light, it doesn't extinguish because radiation could be coming out of it with a light source. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it looks that way. We don't, there's still a lot of unanswered questions on this point, but there's no way for us to go into a black hole to explore that because of its obvious, it's a catastrophic environment. So from a material standpoint, so
could you like put something inside of it to like monitor it to see exactly what it does in this black hole? Do it go to a different dimension? Do it go to a different universe or a different star system? Where does this black hole lead to?
Yeah, we don't know. What's on the other side? We don't know. This may be there are a lot of these black holes. They're not just in the center of galaxies. There are rogue black holes. There are, black hole morsels we're discovering in the far off universe. These exploded pieces of black holes. There's all kinds of stuff we don't yet know the answers to. That's why this field is so fascinating. But more likely we'll build the something technologically that can detect what's going on inside a black hole, because we could never, it's not like Star Trek. We can't, shoot through a black hole and find the answers to these things. So it'll be some sort of device, some sort of something or a series of devices, maybe coming at it from different angles that'll ultimately help us ascertain what is going on inside a black hole. I mean, all of the information in there.
Based on all the information, how would a person possibly travel thousands of light years away to get to another destination? Based on all the information you read, I mean, I don't know nothing. I'm thinking about this off the top of my head, so I can imagine what the vast, equations that and everything else. So I just want to know what do you think is the best, avenue for this?
Well, we aren't going to get thousands of light years away without some sort of technological advance that we're pretty far from. We're going to have to find a way to either warp space so that we move through sections of space instead of, if you take a football field, it takes this long to cross it, but if you fold it up, you get right across. That's the basic concept there. Something of that nature, Kimberly, in order to go those kinds of distances. Otherwise, we're largely relegated to our own solar system and maybe some of these nearby star systems, the Centauri system and others that are close enough by that if we developed our current technology to a certain extent, that over the course of a couple of generations, we could send people out to these places. But to do that, we need to know pretty clearly what's going on out there. If there's a habitable planet 8 or 10 or 12 light years from Earth that looks really Earth-like, and we can actually look at the atmosphere and see what the nitrogen content and oxygen levels and carbon dioxide and the things, look for the signatures of life that are so important to our existence, and we find them in a place like that, then that becomes maybe that's a thing we want to go and start an outpost at. But it's a one-way proposition at this point. You're not going to go. It's going to take generations to get out there with our current technology. So we're probably looking at, for the time being, building programs that enable us to launch to the planets in our solar system and some of their moons, which are also have some nice signatures, some of them, and looking in our neighborhood is going to be a lot easier than trying to go farther away. And thousands of light years is really, really far off, way out, and unnecessary.
Understood. tell us the 411. What do you think the next energy source is going to be?
I think we have some good ones. I think, wind and solar are coming along. If we're able to figure out fusion in a way that is actually we can develop it in a way that can create, we can harness it well enough. It's very dangerous stuff, but if we can figure that out, and there are some signs actually now that we may, that would end, we wouldn't need any of the other resources. If we can create nuclear fusion, we would be able to and harness it, not just blow things up, which is actually fission. But if we are able to harness that energy, that would be a game changer for sure. We could live very harmoniously at that point. Most of the energy savings needs to come from just the way we live, especially in the Western world. That I think would go a long way to restoring the planet and some of its, our natural heritage, which is where we come from, and we need it. We need our biosphere as much as we need, water, and we need, vegetables and the various things we consume to survive. So I think that one. I think conservation is probably a big deal, and then I think we can do a good job with the current resources we have. Solar and wind and hydrothermal, geothermal, things like that. I think that can be, you utilize what's at your disposal, what you can use given your area and the environment you're in. It's not going to be one solution, probably.
That's a well thought out answer. Do you think that that some of these ways of doing the earth, with different energy sources, could be actually hurting the earth? Because to me, I feel like the earth is coming down with a fever, because from what I'm reading, it's actually going in reverse now a little bit.
Great way to put it. The earth is coming down with a fever.
Yeah.
The water's on fire. Yeah, it's getting pretty hot in here. And it's, and I think people experience this in different ways. And I've heard, you can still have cold moments. You can have very cold moments if the ocean currents really change and we hit a crucial desalination. The oceans become less salty to an extent that it really changes how they exchange heat. We could see a real cold trend, which sounds counter to the earth is getting a fever, but you can run a low temperature too, and it's not good. So there are a lot of things that can be done. I think the good news is that I do believe the corporate world is starting to catch on to it. And I think hopefully the consumer environment will change as the prices for the various products and things come down to a level that makes them more competitive. And we sort of start to swing in the direction generally of just being healthier, because we need the planet. We're not going anywhere anytime soon. There's no way we're terraforming or doing any of that stuff on a large scale such that people can live the way they live here on Earth anywhere else anytime soon. I mean, Mars, you think you're going to go there and live like you live here? You're not. You can't go outside. Even when you go outside, you're not outside. There's just no, there's no place that we know of like Earth. And so we really need to take care of the home environment. It's very important. Glad you asked that question. Has nothing to do with my books, but I'm on board for it for sure. I think, one thing that they discuss, I think one thing all of this astronomy has taught us is that, one, the good news is there is stuff out there and that we might be able to inhabit someday should we need to. At some point, the sun's going to expand and engulf the earth, and the earth will no longer be inhabitable. Many, 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 many millions of years away. Billions. So
isn't that like saying you on full with your gasoline and then it runs on heat and everybody like, ah!
Exactly. But it has taught us that, and I think that's one of the values of interstellar research, right? Is, what are we talking about? This is that we really truly do appear to be alone, and until we make contact with an intelligent species or life form from another distant planet in this galaxy, we have to assume we're alone.
I swear I wish that we had some form of life. They say that there have been like 3 times I've seen somewhere on TV or read in a newspaper or article about Earth-like planets. So I say to myself, if there's Earth-like planets, then there's possibly Earth-like people on those planets. But they don't go no further into saying that. And I would love to meet an alien, because I just feel like, they, especially an advanced alien, or I couldn't do nothing to help somebody 300 years behind me, but I can ask them all the types of questions in the world, all different types of questions in the world to advance civilizations,
Yeah. Yep. Well, here's the thing. We've been sending signals into space for 100 years. And these are traveling very fast. So all of these so-called habitable exoplanets that we're finding, they're close enough that if there was a people like us on those planets with big dishes pointing up at the sky, trying to listen for notes from distant planets, that they would have received those, and they've had plenty of time to send a signal back, and we have not seen or heard from anybody. So that doesn't mean that there aren't, it's taken a long time for humanity to get to the point where we can, start to 60 million years of development went into where we are today. So that doesn't mean that there aren't intelligent life forms on some of these planets. It just means that they maybe aren't in a position yet to have developed that technology. But think how lucky we are to be here.
Yeah.
For a couple 100 million years, there were dinosaurs. There were giant reptiles and birds. So what have become modern birds and mammalian life. So the odds that a species was eventually going to climb down from the trees and stand upright and slowly evolve into this, if you believe this, into this, very, very intelligent by Earth standards species, is just so remote. It's almost unfathomable. So yeah, it's you have to get through some of those other things. It's not necessarily a given that you create life and just spontaneously create intelligent life. It may be that you have to go through these other life forms to get to the point where you can create an intelligent one. We just don't know. We don't know any of these answers.
And in closing, I have to know, what are people in 5 minutes or more, what can they get out of your book?
So this book, the first part of the book, the whole first part of the book is about the history, the 200-year or so history of the developments in astronomical equipment and devices and theories and processes the study of gases, chemistry, things like that set the table for the developments of the 20th century. The second the second part of the book is really the development of the theory. So I talk about Einstein and his, wonderful discoveries from 1905 and then on to 1915, and what people did, what the theorists did to discover that. And in the meantime, the young lives of both Edwin Hubble and Milton Humason as they made their way slowly to Mount Wilson. Hubble, the First World War, and then back from England and to the Mount Wilson Observatory, and Humason from Minnesota to California and then up the mountain, and fell in love with the mountain and did it a totally different way. But they both ended up there. And the last third of the book is about them taking this theoretical approach based on Einstein's equations and actually proving that the universe was expanding. So there's a lot of history. There are a lot of interesting historical characters, developments in telescope technology and other technologies and techniques that led to this development. And this book, Hubble, Humason, and the Big Bang, is really about that, that all of those discoveries coming together to help us understand how at least a good portion of how some of this has transpired.
And how can the people reach you if they wanted to buy your book or reach out to you via email or however?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the book is available online at all of the places you like to shop for books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc. People can reach me at my website, ronvoller.com. You can also send me email if you want to at contact@ronvoller.com. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have. You can check out my podcast, Bang Goes the Universe. That's on just about wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check that out. And we're researching all of the developments in human evolution from 100,000 years ago to the present, to talk about how all of this really, really came together. It's a long, fun little romp through history. Yeah, I have articles coming out in Astronomy Magazine, Astronomy Now in UK, and Astronomy here in the US. Yeah, those are the ways to get a hold of me.
Well, I want to thank you, Bill Nye, for everything. I really appreciate you because you're like a Bill Nye, like seriously. Oh my God, you didn't even guess the joke. But
Bill Nye, so that's good company.
Exactly. I watched him as a child. Okay, so I wanted to thank you so much for joining my show. Stay on the line. You guys take care. Thank you guys for joining the show and inviting people to hear and listen. You take care, be safe, and I'll see y'all another time. Bye.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly.